The Galactic Council chamber was silent except for the soft hum of translation devices. Representative Kavalith of the Draxian Empire stood before the assembled delegates, his three eyes sweeping across the room with barely concealed satisfaction. Behind him, a massive holographic display flickered to life, showing the cold statistics of what had become the most feared training program in known space. The Nightmare Protocols, they called them. Military simulations so brutal, so impossibly difficult, that completing even one scenario was considered a career-defining achievement. Designed by the ancient Verakthi war minds thousands of years ago, these programs had broken the spirit of countless warriors across dozens of species. The scenarios were mathematically perfect storms of tactical impossibility, in situations where every choice led to disaster, where victory was theoretically possible but practically impossible. Kavalith clicked his mandibles together in what his species considered a smile. Today, he would present the most recent data on humanity, the newest species, to join the galactic community. The humans had been given access to the protocols 6 months ago as part of their military integration assessment. Every council member knew what would happen. The humans would fail, just like everyone else. They would realize their place in the hierarchy. They would understand that their primitive little species was nowhere near ready for the challenges of galactic warfare, except that was not what happened. Kavalith began his presentation with confidence. He pulled up the first data set showing participation rates. The standard protocol suggested that military academies across the galaxy use the Nightmare protocols sparingly, perhaps once per year, because the psychological impact of failure was so severe. The average species attempted 12 scenarios per solar cycle. The Draxian Empire, considered one of the most militaristic societies in the Council, attempted 43. The humans had attempted 2,847 scenarios in the last 6 months. A murmur ran through the council chamber. Several delegates checked their translation devices, certain they had misheard. Kavalith felt a small prickle of unease, but pushed forward. Obviously, the humans simply did not understand what they were dealing with. They were throwing their people at the simulations like primitive creatures, probably causing massive psychological damage to their military personnel. As he would demonstrate this clearly. He pulled up the next slide showing completion rates. This would be the damning evidence. Across all species, the average completion rate was 0.3%. The best performing species, the warlike Thorian hegemony, managed 1.2%. The Draxian Empire itself stood at 0.8%, and Kavalith himself had completed exactly one Nightmare Protocol scenario in his 30 years of military service. It was his proudest achievement. The human completion rate was 68%. The chamber erupted. Delegates were on their feet, appendages gesturing wildly, demands for recounts and data verification filling the air. Kavalith stood frozen, his prepared speech forgotten. This was impossible. The numbers had to be wrong. There was no way any species could achieve such a rate. The protocols were designed to be unbeatable. Ambassador Chen of the human delegation requested permission to address the council. She was a short woman by human standards, with gray hair and calm, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything. She stood with the easy confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. The council arbiter granted her permission to speak, probably hoping she would explain the obvious error in the data. Ambassador Chen simply smiled. "Thank you, Arbiter," Chen began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "I understand there is some confusion about our performance in what you call the Nightmare Protocols. I would like to clarify our approach, if I may." She activated her own data display, showing a completely different set of metrics. Where the council tracked attempts and completions, yet the human data showed something else entirely. Categories, difficulty ratings, speed run times, high score tables. When we received access to the nightmare protocols, Chen explained, we did what humans naturally do with any challenge. We turned it into a game. She pulled up footage from a human military academy. Young soldiers sat in simulation pods, not with the grim determination that other species showed, but with excited anticipation. They were laughing, joking, making bets on who could complete scenarios faster. The viewing gallery was packed with spectators cheering and groaning at key moments. You see, Chen continued, we did not view these as terrifying tests of military might. We saw them as very good training exercises. Very, very good training exercises. Some of the best simulation work we had ever encountered, actually. The scenario design is remarkable. Whoever created these understood warfare at a fundamental level. Kavalith found his voice. These scenarios are designed to be impossible. How can you possibly complete them? Chen looked genuinely puzzled. Impossible? No, Representative Kavalith, difficult certainly, but not impossible. Perhaps your approach has been different from ours? She brought up another display. This one showed human military doctrine regarding simulation training. The numbers were staggering. Human soldiers were expected to spend 30% of their training time in combat simulations. They ran scenarios constantly, learning from each failure, adjusting tactics, trying new approaches. They shared strategies across their global network, collaborated on solutions, and treated the entire thing like a massive puzzle to be solved collectively. One thing we noticed immediately, Chen said, was that the protocols assumed certain limitations in the participants. They assumed that losing repeatedly would cause psychological damage, that soldiers would give up, that the difficulty would create despair. This is true for most species, yes? Nervous agreement rippled through the chamber. Every species knew the psychological toll of the protocols. They were designed to break you down, to show you your limits, to teach humility through defeat. Humans do not work that way, Chen said simply. Failure makes us curious. When we lose, we do not despair. We analyze. We problem solve. We get annoyed, certainly. We get frustrated. But mostly we get determined. Every failure is just data. Then every defeat is just another puzzle piece. She pulled up a specific scenario, one known throughout the galaxy as the Siege of Korvath. It was considered the most brutal of all the nightmare protocols, a situation where a small defending force faced an overwhelming enemy with limited ammunition, no reinforcements, and terrain that offered no tactical advantages. The enemy AI was ruthless and adaptive. Most species had a 0.1% completion rate on Korvath. Their best commanders had spent years training before attempting it. The Siege of Korvath, Chen said, is currently the third most popular scenario among human military academies. We use it for mid-level tactical training. Our cadets complete it with an 89% success rate. Would you like to see how? She did not wait for an answer, and the display shifted to show a recording from a human simulation. A young lieutenant, barely out of basic training, entered the Korvath scenario. The setup was identical to what every species faced: impossible odds, limited resources, certain death. The human lieutenant looked at the tactical display, muttered something that the translators rendered as an Earth expletive, and then smiled. He immediately did something that no other species had considered. He ignored the prepared defensive positions entirely, and instead had his forces collapse back to a single building in the center of the town. He stacked the limited ammunition in specific patterns. He positioned his soldiers not to fight, but to observe and relay information. When the enemy attacked, expecting to find defenders spread across the town, they found nothing. They spread out to search. The human lieutenant watched their patterns for exactly 4 minutes, then gave a single order. His entire force emerged simultaneously and hit 3 specific points in the enemy formation. The attack lasted 90 seconds. The humans dropped their weapons and ran, letting the enemy chase them directly into pre-positioned ammunition traps that detonated remotely. The scenario was over in 12 minutes. The young lieutenant had achieved a tactical victory with 90% of his forces intact. He climbed out of the simulator, checked his score on a leaderboard, swore again because he had only placed 8th, and immediately queued up for another attempt. The council chamber was silent. Ambassador Chen looked around at the assembled delegates. "You call these scenarios nightmares," she said quietly. "You use them to teach humility, to show your warriors their limitations, to break them down. We use them as practice. We run them before breakfast. Our soldiers compete for high scores like they are playing games at an arcade. Because to us, that is what they are. Very good games with very good lessons. But still just games." The implications were sinking in across the chamber. If humans could complete the nightmare protocols with such ease, if they treated impossible scenarios as casual entertainment, what did that say about their actual combat capabilities? Chen seemed to read the room. She brought up one final piece of data. "This is our current request," she said. "We would like permission to access the Varakthi archives that contain the source code for the nightmare protocols, as several of our programmers believe they can improve the scenarios, make them more challenging, more interesting. We have, you see, beaten all of them now, multiple times. Some of our recreational gaming clans have started making speedrun videos. Our current record for completing all 247 scenarios is 16 hours and 42 minutes, set by a team of college students last week." She paused, then added almost apologetically, "We are quite enjoying them. We would hate for the challenge to end." 3 weeks after Ambassador Chen's presentation to the Galactic Council, Commander Vrel of the Thorian hegemony found himself doing something he had never imagined. He was sitting in a human military academy cafeteria, eating what the humans called pizza. I was watching teenage cadets casually discuss tactical scenarios that would have given his most experienced officers nightmares. The council had decided that someone needed to investigate the human claims personally. They had chosen Vrel for several reasons. First, he was Thorian, a species known for their military prowess and ruthless honesty. Second, he had personally completed 2 nightmare protocol scenarios in his career, more than most council representatives could claim. Third, and perhaps most importantly, he was skeptical enough to call out any deception he encountered. He had arrived at the academy expecting elaborate security measures, stern military discipline, and perhaps some evidence of the psychological trauma that should accompany such extensive exposure to the protocols. What he found instead was chaos. Organized chaos. Certainly, but chaos nonetheless. The simulation center was operating 24 hours a day. Students signed up for time slots like they were booking recreational facilities. There was a waiting list to experience scenarios designed to break the strongest military minds in the galaxy. When Vrel had asked about mandatory psychological evaluations after simulation runs, the Academy Commandant had looked confused and said they only did counseling if someone specifically requested it. So far, this year, no one had. Vrel watched a group of cadets at a nearby table. They were reviewing footage of a simulation run on a portable display device. One of them, a young woman with bright red hair, was pointing at specific moments in the tactical display. "See right there," she said, her voice carrying despite the crowded room. "And that is where I messed up. I committed forces to that flank 3 seconds too early. The AI recognized the pattern and adapted. If I had waited, kept that squad in reserve, I could have exploited the gap in their formation when they shifted to respond to the main assault." Another cadet, barely old enough to have finished basic training by Thorian standards, nodded thoughtfully. "You could also try the Martinez Gambit. Give them exactly what they expect on that flank, then pull a full retreat to draw them into the kill zone. I saw someone pull that off last week. Super risky, though. The timing has to be perfect." The red-haired cadet grinned. "Risky is fun. I am going to try it this afternoon. Want to bet lunch tomorrow on whether I can make it work? Vrel found the entire scene disturbing. These children, and they were children by any reasonable standard, were discussing tactics with the casual ease of experienced generals. They were betting meals on their ability to complete scenarios that Vrel himself would approach with ceremony and careful preparation. They were having fun. Major Rodriguez, his human liaison officer, sat down across from him with a tray of food. She was in her 30s, a compact woman with sharp eyes and laugh lines that suggested she smiled often. She had completed 47 Nightmare Protocol scenarios. 47. Vrel still could not fully process that number. "You look troubled, Commander," Rodriguez said, taking a bite of her pizza. "Not enjoying your visit?" Vrel gestured at the cadets. "They are discussing the protocols like they are discussing weather patterns. Do they not understand what they are facing?" Rodriguez followed his gaze and smiled. "Oh, they understand perfectly. That is why they are so focused on the details. They know the scenarios are hard. They know failure is likely, especially when they are learning. But that does not scare them. It motivates them." "How?" Vrel demanded. "How is failure motivating?" "When I failed my first protocol scenario, I spent 3 days in mental recovery. I questioned my entire career. I had to undergo extensive counseling before I was cleared to return to duty. These cadets are treating it like a casual game." Rodriguez considered her words carefully. "Commander, may I ask you something personal? When you completed your first protocol scenario, the one that succeeded, how did you feel?" Vrel did not hesitate. Pride. Honor. "It was the greatest achievement of my military career. I was awarded the Star of Tactical Excellence. My family held a ceremony that lasted 3 days. My name was entered into the Halls of Valor." Rodriguez nodded. "Exactly. For you, the protocols are sacred. They are a test, a rite of passage, something rare and special that you approach with reverence. Is that correct?" "Yes," Vrel agreed, unsure where this was leading. "For humans," Rodriguez continued, "they are just very good training tools. Excellent training tools, honestly. Best we have ever encountered. But still just tools. When that cadet over there completes a scenario, she does not get a ceremony. She gets a score. She checks the leaderboard. Maybe her friends congratulate her. Then she queues up for another one because she wants to improve her time or try a different strategy or beat her personal record." She leaned forward. "We removed the mystique, Commander. We took something you built up as sacred and terrifying, and we made it mundane. Not easy, not simple, but mundane, repeatable. Something you practice until you get good at it. That is what humans do with challenges. We grind them down through repetition until they become routine." Vrel felt something shift in his understanding. It was not that humans were fearless. It was that they had fundamentally different relationship with fear and failure. They did not avoid difficulty. They pursued it. They found it entertaining. "Would you like to try one?" Rodriguez asked suddenly. "We can set you up in a simulator. No one will judge you if you fail. No one will even know except us. And if you succeed, well, you might see why my cadets enjoy these so much." Vrel hesitated. That the last time he had attempted a protocol scenario was 6 years ago. He had failed. The psychological evaluation had taken weeks. His commanding officer had suggested he never attempt another one. But here, in this cafeteria full of laughing human children who treated impossible scenarios like recreational activities, that advice seemed almost absurd. "Which scenario?" he asked. Rodriguez smiled. "How about we start with something medium difficulty, the Battle of Xerxian Pass. It is a good tactical puzzle, resource management, terrain utilization, timing challenges. Our cadets use it for intermediate training. Current completion rate among second-year students is about 73%. Vrel knew the Battle of Xerxian Pass. The Thorian military used it as a final examination for officer candidates. Their completion rate was 8%, as it was considered one of the more brutal scenarios in the entire protocol library, and humans used it for intermediate training. He stood up. "Show me your simulator." The simulation center was impressive by any standard. Rows of pods, each containing a fully immersive tactical environment. Human cadets moved between them with practiced efficiency. Rodriguez led Vrel to an empty pod and helped him configure the interface for Thorian physiology. The controls adapted smoothly, another sign of human attention to detail. "Before we start," Rodriguez said, "I want to give you one piece of advice. This is not a sacred test. This is practice. If you fail, you learn. If you succeed, you learn. Either outcome is useful. Do not put pressure on yourself. Just try to enjoy the problem. Enjoy the problem." What strange philosophy. But Vrel nodded and entered the simulation. The Battle of Xerxian Pass loaded around him. He was commanding a defensive force in a narrow mountain pass. The enemy outnumbered him 4-1. His ammunition was limited. Reinforcements were 12 hours away. The terrain offered some defensive advantages, but also created limitations. Weather conditions were deteriorating. The enemy AI was adaptive and ruthless. Vrel felt the familiar weight of the scenario settling on him. The pressure, the stakes, the understanding that every decision mattered. He began positioning his forces according to standard Thorian defensive doctrine. Establish strong points. Create overlapping fields of fire. Prepare fallback positions. Then he stopped. He thought about the human cadets in the cafeteria, their casual confidence, and their willingness to try risky strategies, their focus on enjoying the problem rather than fearing the failure. He canceled his initial deployment and tried something different, something aggressive, something that his training would have called reckless. He positioned his forces not to defend the pass, but to attack through it. He allocated his limited ammunition not for sustained defense, but for a single overwhelming assault. He set up his fallback positions not as safe havens, but as bait. The enemy attacked. Vrel executed his plan with aggressive timing. It went wrong almost immediately. His forward units took heavier casualties than projected. The enemy adapted faster than he expected. His fallback bait failed to draw them in. Within 6 minutes, he was facing complete tactical collapse. But something strange happened. Instead of the despair he normally felt in the face of failure, Vrel felt curious. The enemy had adapted in an unexpected way. That was interesting. That was data. He could use that. And he had just learned that his aggressive opening, while flawed, had created 3 seconds of confusion in the enemy formation. 3 seconds that could potentially be exploited. The simulation ended in defeat. Vrel climbed out of the pod. Rodriguez was waiting with a tablet showing his performance metrics. "Not bad for a first attempt with a new strategy," she said. "You identified a vulnerability in the enemy response pattern. That 3-second window you created at Mark 0422 is exploitable. Want to try again?" Vrel stared at her. He had just failed a protocol scenario. He had failed spectacularly, with casualties exceeding 60%. And Rodriguez was asking if he wanted to try again. Not next month. Not after extensive debriefing. Right now. Immediately. "Yes," he said, surprising himself. "Yes, I want to try again." Rodriguez smiled and reset the simulation. Vrel climbed back into the pod. This time he kept his aggressive opening, but adjusted the timing. He exploited that 3-second window more effectively. He still failed, but he lasted 12 minutes instead of 6. More data, more lessons, more interesting problems to solve. He tried again, and again, and again. Each failure taught him something. Each attempt refined his approach. Somewhere around his 7th run, Vrel realized he was enjoying himself. This was not terrifying. This was engaging. This was, dare he think it, fun. On his 11th attempt, 4 hours after he started, Vrel completed the Battle of Xerxian Pass. He emerged from the pod exhausted but energized. Rodriguez was grinning at him. "Congratulations, Commander," she said. "Solid completion. Time was not great, but your final strategy was very creative. That thing you did with the weather system was brilliant. I have not seen anyone weaponize the environmental conditions quite that way before." Vrel looked at his performance scores. He had completed a Nightmare Protocol scenario, his 3rd ever. It had taken him 11 attempts and 4 hours of continuous practice. Among his people, this would have been viewed as excessive, possibly concerning. Among humans, Rodriguez was already moving on, asking if he wanted to try something harder. The implications were staggering. This was not about humans being naturally better warriors. This was about humans having a completely different relationship with failure, with challenge, with the learning process itself. They had taken something designed to intimidate and made it into a tool. They had made the nightmares mundane through pure repetition and stubborn determination. Vrel understood now why the Galactic Council was concerned. It was not that humans were invincible. It was that they approached warfare with the same relentless iterative improvement they applied to everything else. They practiced until impossible became difficult. They practiced until difficult became routine. And they enjoyed the process. He would need to include all of this in his report. But first, he was going to try one more scenario. 6 months after Commander Vrel's visit to the Human Military Academy, the Galactic Council convened again. And this time, the mood in the chamber was different. Representatives arrived quietly, without the usual displays of status and power. They knew what was coming. The question was no longer whether humans were exceptional at the Nightmare Protocols. The question was what that meant for galactic security. Ambassador Chen stood before them once more. But she was not alone. With her stood Admiral Sarah Park, commander of the Human Third Fleet, and Dr. James Wilson, a civilian who had been introduced as a simulation designer. The presence of a civilian in such a high-level military discussion raised eyebrows across several species, but Chen had insisted. The council arbiter opened the session. "Ambassador Chen, you requested this meeting to discuss modifications to the Nightmare Protocols. The Council has reviewed your preliminary proposals. Many of us have concerns. These scenarios have been maintained in their current form for over 2,000 years. They serve a crucial purpose across galactic military training. Why should we allow you to modify them?" Chen nodded respectfully. "Arbiter, members of the Council, we are not asking to replace the current protocols. We are asking to expand them, to add new scenarios alongside the existing ones. Dr. Wilson, if you would explain?" Dr. Wilson stepped forward, looking slightly uncomfortable in the formal setting. He was younger than most had expected, perhaps in his early 30s by human standards, with tired eyes that suggested too many late nights staring at code. He activated a holographic display. "Thank you, Ambassador. Members of the Council, my name is James Wilson. Before I joined the Military Simulation Division, I worked in the civilian entertainment industry, video games specifically. I designed combat scenarios for commercial release. I mention this because it is relevant to what I am about to show you." He pulled up lines of code, tactical algorithms, behavioral patterns. "The Nightmare Protocols are remarkable achievements. The AI systems are sophisticated. The scenario designs are brutally efficient. The creator or creators understood warfare at a fundamental level. However, they were built with certain assumptions." Wilson highlighted specific sections of code. "These scenarios assume that participants value the lives of their simulated soldiers. They assume hesitation before committing to irreversible actions. They assume that repeated failure will cause psychological distress, leading to abandonment of the training. These are reasonable assumptions for most species. He looked directly at the council. Humans break all of these assumptions. We do not hesitate in simulations because we understand they are simulations. We do not abandon training after failure because failure is how we learn. And we have spent our entire evolutionary history gaming systems, finding exploits, discovering unintended solutions, turning restrictions into opportunities. The display shifted to show human completion rates by strategy type. Conventional tactics, those used by most species, had a 34% success rate among humans. Experimental tactics, strategies that violated standard military doctrine, had a 72% success rate. Exploitative tactics, approaches that used quirks in the AI behavior or scenario design, had a 91% success rate. You see the problem, Wilson continued. We have essentially solved the protocols, not because we are better warriors, though we are becoming very good warriors thanks to this training. We solved them because we approached them like puzzles. We found the patterns. We discovered the exploits. We shared the solutions across our entire species within days of finding them. Representative Kovalev, who had presented the original data 6 months ago, spoke up. His tone was sharp. Are you suggesting that your species cheated? That you found ways to circumvent the intended difficulty? Wilson smiled slightly. We prefer to call it optimization. But yes, essentially. Not through any dishonest means. We simply found solutions that the original designers did not anticipate. For example, in the Siege of Korvath scenario, the AI assumes you will try to hold all your defensive positions. It expects rational resource allocation. It does not expect you to deliberately sacrifice 40% of your force in the first 3 minutes to gather behavioral data, then use that data to execute a perfect counterattack that ends the scenario in 12 minutes. Shocked silence filled the chamber. That strategy, the deliberate mass sacrifice of troops even in simulation, violated every military ethic held by most species. It was callous, it was ruthless, it was also, apparently, devastatingly effective. Admiral Park spoke for the first time, her voice calm and professional. The protocols teach us that nothing is sacred in war except victory. We learned that lesson well, perhaps too well. We have now trained an entire generation of officers who view the protocols not as terrifying trials, but as routine exercises. That is both our strength and our concern. She gestured to Dr. Wilson. Which is why we brought Dr. Wilson to the council. We need harder scenarios. Not for intimidation, not for testing limits, but because our soldiers need to continue learning. They need challenges that force them to adapt, to grow, to face situations they cannot simply optimize away. The current protocols are becoming routine. We need them to remain challenging. Commander Vrel, who had been invited to observe, stood to speak. The Arbiter recognized him. Commander, your perspective would be valuable. Vrel took a moment to collect his thoughts. 6 months ago, I came before this council skeptical of human claims. I have since spent considerable time observing human training methods. I have, with permission, attempted multiple protocol scenarios under human guidance. I have completed 8 scenarios in the last 6 months. 8. Before my visit to human space, I had completed 2 scenarios in my entire career. He looked around the chamber. The difference is not physical. It is not that humans are stronger or faster or smarter than Thorians. The difference is philosophical. Humans have created a culture where failure is not shameful, where challenge is recreational, where impossible is simply a starting point. They have taken our most sacred military trials and made them mundane through sheer repetition and determination. Vrel paused, then continued with obvious difficulty. And I believe we should learn from them. And not just accept their proposed modifications, but fundamentally rethink how we approach military training across the Council. The protocols were meant to humble us, to show us our limits, but limits can be pushed. Limits can be exceeded. Humans have proven that. The council erupted in debate.